Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's live. It is now March 15th. Isn't March 15th the Ides of March? I think so, because yesterday was Pi Day. And today's the Ides of March. So beware the Ides of March, but maybe not when there's a live that's going to explain to you about narcissism and surviving and healing from narcissistic abuse. Again, I'm doing these lives. Because I think they're a great forum for people to get questions answered about what they're experiencing, but also, as I said, it's the commitment to us saying, like, if you're going to keep buying the book and helping it succeed the way it has been, well, then we're going to keep these things going, and every week we make it on that list, we're going to keep raffling. Like I said, I'm going to be doing teas with Dr. Ramani maybe until my 80s, and that's okay because I can do it sitting down. So if you order, just again, before I get into the live of it all, and I have about 15 topics that you all shared yesterday, so I'm actually excited about today's live. If you do order the book by midnight in your time zone tomorrow, March 16th, if you order it by Saturday, March 16th, midnight, your time zone, not my time zone, your time zone, you can still, it's not too late if you haven't ordered it yet, or you're like, oh, I forgot to order it. Great. Then you'll get access as long as you verify your purchase. I'll explain that in a minute. Buy it, verify that you got it. You'll get access to our 6-hour live retreat. As soon as we no longer doing this whole list thing, then people can go, but they'll have to pay for it. And then you'll also get more entries into the raffle. In fact, I was just right before this call, was working with one of my team members on how we're starting to notify raffle winners, because for the first 3 weeks they've been picked. So I'm signing books and finding out how people want books signed and all that other stuff. So people are indeed winning, and we're going to keep the raffle going each week we're on the list. So this is the time to get the book. If you want to get entered into the raffle, if you want to get that live access to that live virtual retreat, all you need to do is order the book, hard copy or ebook, verify the purchase in the link in Instagram or in the video notes. And remember, it's 30% off on Amazon. In fact, I had to order some books for someone today. It wasn't bad. They were like $20 and change. So it wasn't terrible. In fact, it was a better price than I could have gotten through another portal I could access as an author. It's actually a better price. So I was like, this is the time to get it, because Amazon moves those prices around like I don't know. But I'll keep reminding you of that. Today I'm going to take on some of these topics you sent me. But I also, I'm going to answer questions. So please do drop your answers. Your answer. You could drop your answers too, but drop your questions into the chat, and then we will take them on. And if you may not come up with questions until I talk, I actually recently gave a public lecture. And I thought, well, I'm going to try something different. And I'm going to ask everyone at the beginning if anyone has any questions. And it was a shame because nobody did, because I actually would have spent all the time on their questions. Then I gave the talk and I did it short. I was supposed to talk for an hour. I talked like 45 minutes. Then everybody had questions. So maybe that's what's happening here. So I'm going to take it from the top. Many people gave some really thoughtful topics yesterday, which were actually quite wonderful. And so I'm going to get to that. A couple of interesting emails I've gotten. And again, I'll never share anyone's identity who sent an email, but there's some really interesting themes that came up from one of those emails in particular. So I'm going to pull it out, the themes, in a way that would never identify who sent it in any way. But there were some things that would be worth talking about on a live. So the first thing that came up were narcissistic siblings. Narcissistic friends and narcissistic siblings are two of the topics we don't talk about enough. And I think there's a couple of reasons for it. I think that intimate relationships have things that can happen in them that are unique to them, like someone cheating on you. There is a level of trust, a level of vulnerability. There's sort of more social rules around like a marriage or a long-term committed relationship. A parent obviously has developmental effects on us. A boss is a place we probably spend maybe potentially every day of the week interacting with this person, or a lot of days, or our days are affected by them, or a colleague, in a way that we can't always control. Friends are interesting, right? Because they're a different kind of a relationship of choice, but friends are ridiculously impactful. But also there are narcissistic siblings. And let's talk about that, because I think that's even more impactful, but also not, depending on how much they're in your life. Siblings are interesting because they, in many, not all, but in many cases, were shaped by the same developmental influences as you, right? And narcissistic siblings are an absolute reminder that not everybody raised by a narcissistic parent becomes narcissistic. In fact, the vast majority do not. One of the emails I got today was asking that question. Well, they said that they had read something that says most people who have a narcissistic parent will have narcissistic qualities. Absolutely. I actually don't agree with that. There's no research supporting that. What we know is that once a person has a narcissistic parent, affects them through childhood or step parent or significant caregiver, most of the shaping is in the realm of doubting oneself, feeling shamed around your sort of subjective self. Like if you express yourself, you feel as though you're speaking out of turn, you feel expressing feelings is a dangerous place. Things like the fawn response can come out of it. Narcissism, not all the time. In fact, not always. Some people will say things that came out of my family for me is like, I sometimes will respond to things the way that I watched my parents respond to, which aren't the healthiest. The fact that you're picking them out as unhealthy patterns, boom, that's it. You have the insight. We all do that. I can say that as a survivor myself. They're like, "Ooh," I'll think to myself, "Well, that was not great," but also understand like, okay, that wasn't great. Attempt to make amends. Attempt to make it right. Those to take those steps. Just being aware, clocking like, I don't like that I said that. I see where it comes from. That actually flies in the face of what we know about narcissism. But I'll often talk with people from families. There's 2 siblings, there's 4 siblings, whatever, and only one of them is narcissistic, right? And many of you listening are not. And so there's part of your evidence too, is that not everybody will, some will, many won't. But let's say you do have a narcissistic sibling. Now, a couple of things here. There's a lot of things that make sibling relationships quite different. Are they how close are you in age to them? How much time did you spend with them? Obviously, there's a big gap, like 10, 12 years, big developmental gaps. It'll almost feel as though they weren't that much a part of your life because they were always in a different phase than you. And then you may have moved out or made your own life and they were still coming through childhood. So that can have a different impact. And that can be a funny impact because if there was a big age gap, you didn't really have a relationship with them. They were present in some ways, then they leave. But you grow older, you go into adulthood. And now maybe as an adult, they do come into your life in certain ways, or you're still sort of integrated into this family system and they're narcissistic for some reason. It can, whether they're older than you, younger than you, it doesn't matter because they're part of a system that you may still be involved in that can have an effect on you. Some of you were raised in blended families. So you may have someone you would identify as a sibling, but you may not have 2 shared biological parents with them, that they may be we call a step sibling or half sibling or something like that. Their narcissism, though, can still affect you in adulthood and may also have affected you developmentally. So let me take on that developmental piece first. When we're kids, it's possible you may look back now on that person you now identify in adulthood as a narcissistic sibling. It is not unusual to look back in childhood to see that your narcissistic sibling was a bully, competitive, jealous. A lot of this relates also to family roles. Now, more often than not, none of these are guarantees. There's no absolutes in this. But more often than not, the child that goes on to become narcissistic adult in adulthood from a family system is the child who is probably the golden child. In some cases, a scapegoat may end up in a vulnerable narcissistic or even potentially a malignant narcissistic space as an adult. The invisible child could have a risk of developing into a vulnerable narcissistic pattern. But by and large, the classical way this will often play out is a golden child sibling that grows up as a grandiose narcissistic into a grandiose narcissistic child. Now, sometimes the child they won't be a golden child. They will, I guess, maybe invisible child. They'll be trying to get attention, right? They'll literally be trying. They'll be the people who go on to develop, who are from children, go on to become narcissistic adults, are often attention-seeking children. They will be saying, "Everybody, look at me! I'm going to do a variety show by myself," and nobody really wants to watch them. This poor kid is just trying to get everyone's attention, and are often rebuffed. And with narcissistic parents, they will often literally ignore each of the older children in favor of a new child. Like it's like they can't multitask with all their kids. So if that sibling the sibling who'd go on to become a narcissistic adult is one of the older siblings. That ignoring of them could have happened pretty early in the game. And like I said, scapegoated kids can, in some cases, become narcissistic. The golden children, often they're invisible kids too. So I hope that makes sense. So you were likely maltreated by your narcissistic sibling in childhood. Like I said, bullying, competitiveness, jealousy, mean-spiritedness. They may have said terrible things to peers about you. You would have sensed it, right? You would have definitely sensed it. And it wouldn't have been the ordinary sibling stuff. Like any of you who have had siblings know you would quibble about a red crayon. It's not that ordinary stuff. It's mean stuff. Thinking about one case I had consulted on, it was brothers. One brother had a very, very sweet temperament. He was a sweet-tempered child. I had the opportunity to talk with the parents. The one brother almost clocked moderately psychopathically. Almost felt like a malignant narcissistic kid, even not a nice kid, very much a bullier, like physically abused. The older sibling was the one who grew up to be a malignant narcissist, but very abusive towards his brother, physically abusive, would often make the brother a fall guy, like would do something wrong and then set the younger brother up to take the blame for it. So these are the kinds of patterns they will, again, the sibling in essence is trying to subjugate the non-narcissistic sibling, but because they're kids, we don't call them narcissistic. Like I said, bullying, competition, cruelty, setting the sibling up to take the fall. Those are all the things we see. As this goes into adulthood, a lot of times, no 6-year-old is going to say, well, my 7-year-old or 8-year-old sister is narcissistic. No one's going to say that, but may very much recall, I didn't like my sibling as a child. Like I didn't like them. I think we were supposed to. And you'll even look at pictures from then and say, I could already see it on my face. Like I was smiling the way I was supposed to. So may not hold potentially or particularly positive memories of that. The way it shows up in adulthood, though, can be very, very toxic because you're embedded in a system where sometimes, for example, I have seen in that same scenario I was telling you clinically I was working with was these people who had the malignantly narcissistic brother really basically commandeered the entire family trust and spent all the money on himself. And so it's things like that there will be financial abuse. They may continue to be a bully in adulthood. They may be very triangulating in the family system. They may remain very competitive, very jealous, always trying to get one over on you. They may even if let's say your parents aren't narcissistic, or your parents, something else was going on. Because sometimes narcissistic siblings can come out of not narcissistic parents. It's not as common, but it could very well be, no matter who your parents are, narcissistic or not narcissistic, they will triangulate with those parents. And they will definitely sort of do the sort of smear campaign on you within the family system. That's all very common. It's a tricky space because it's not unusual for parents. Again, doesn't matter if they're narcissistic or not, or parent or whomever the people, the parental figures are, caregiving figures are in a system. Sometimes people, like I said, want that status quo and will say, come on, figure it out with your sibling. You may also feel guilty if you have children, your sibling has children, and you want your children to have cousin relationships. So I've seen people say, to hell with it, you're not getting cousins because this is not worth it for me to interact with this sibling. So cutting out or distancing from or disengaging from a sibling can get very, very complicated depending on how much you want access to other family members or contact with other family members. But I have to say, I cannot underestimate the power of the narcissistic sibling. I'm always struck by, I would say probably over the course of my practice, I'm going to spitball this, I haven't actually done the specific count. I'm guessing probably 8 to 10% of clients I've worked with over my career, the narcissistic sibling was the presenting issue. It was the biggest problem. It was what was causing them the most acute distress. It was bringing up a lot of feelings of guilt, a sense of, this is the only keepers of my history. And some people will say when they have narcissistic parents, when your sibling's also narcissistic, or parent, when your sibling's also narcissistic, you don't even have that accurate mirror accurate lens into your childhood, because the one person who bore witness with you as a child or has their own distorted narrative of it, and in fact may even minimize or mock or dismiss any sort of description or recollection you have of your childhood. So suffice it to say that don't minimize the effects and the narcissistic abuse impacts of having had a narcissistic sibling, either as a child or an adult. And even if as an adult that narcissistic sibling is no longer in your life, depending on what the nature of that sibling relationship was in childhood, what happened, because it would have had a developmental impact, can be almost as potent as some of the effects as a narcissistic parent. And you may very well have felt abandoned by other adults in the family system if your narcissistic sibling was sort of allowed to keep bullying you, harming you, maybe even physically or other forms of abuse, engaging in other forms of abuse against you, and people were just writing it off as siblings being siblings. So again, a lot of what I'm giving you here are little bits. This is reminding me we probably need a whole program on narcissistic siblings. And this is actually, I want to open up this question because it relates to some of what we were saying here. And like I said, I'm going to pull some pieces out of this because I think that there's some really useful things here. This idea that it's inaccurate that children of narcissistic parents are narcissistic, because it's, again, this is where I hate all this bad information that's out there, because it really fills people with this big sense of doubt. Just because you have a narcissistic parent, even if you observe this, I want you to think, for those of you with narcissistic parents, how many of you recall feeling, even at a young age, a sense of shame at how your parent was conducting themselves? Like you could watch them, I don't know, talking to anyone, a teacher or a person, you might have gone on errands with them and you might have watched them. And it's amazing at a young age what empathic kids, how they're able to sort of know sort of what's right and what's wrong, what's good behavior, what's not. Listen, kids have to be nice in school, right? So you're taught to be. So you're out in public with this parent and they're behaving in this way that is not okay. And as a child, you may have in some ways felt you were absorbing some of that shame of their entitled or dismissive or just bad conduct. So I actually think that not only do kids not just absorb all of that, they learn at an early age it's not okay, but don't have the capacity for social, developmental, psychological attachment reasons to be able to say, my dad's a dick. Like you just don't have, the child doesn't have that. Some kids do. And heaven help those heavy truth teller kids. Some of you are out there truth seer kids. But for some kids, especially if it's happening young enough, you're thinking like, okay, parents, the only game in town, I do need to attach to them. And it that ends up becoming this really sort of unstable attachment object, because there's things you want to like about the parent, but then they're behaving in these terrible, terrible ways. And it can sort of create this, again, this ongoing fawn response, where when people behave in this imperious, entitled way, we don't call them out. We may fawn, like try to win them over, calm them down, accommodate, whatever it is we do as our sympathetic nervous system involuntary response them. But at some level, we also know it's not okay. We just weren't able to create an integrated response to that. And so again, this is ideas that so many people say, the one thing I don't ever want to be like is my own parent. And again, most people who are children of narcissistic parents are not. And yet, though, sometimes what happens is that because people who go through, if you've had if your experience of a narcissistic parent, if it was severe enough, consistent enough, you didn't have another safe caregiver in the mix, that people can experience complex trauma. This is a lot of what Dr. Ingrid Clayton's work is about, that this is sort of complex trauma that comes from childhood exposure to narcissistic abuse. And some of the patterns in complex trauma can sometimes be a little bit interpersonally difficult. People of complex trauma might show up in some of their interpersonal interactions and say and do things that the other person may not experience as the nicest things, because the person with complex trauma is trying to feel safe in what feels like an otherwise unsafe interaction. And a lot of interpersonal interactions feel unsafe to people with complex trauma. And then, though, the person with complex trauma who's been through narcissistic abuse will sit and ruminate about, I can't believe I said that terrible thing. I wish I had said that differently. I hope they don't hate me. And that rumination of, you said it oftentimes because it was a sympathetic nervous system response secondary to the complex trauma. You ruminate about the thing that you said, and you make yourself more miserable. But then because of what narcissistic abuse is, you wonder if you're narcissistic. So I'm kind of giving you sort of a thematic issue that comes up, but it's not true that the majority of people who grow up with a narcissistic parent become narcissistic. It's actually quite different than that. The math is flipped. It's not the majority. Some do, but not all. So then another person said thematically, could we talk today about in the live about how do we protect our emotions when we can't go no contact, when we can't distance ourselves from the narcissistic person, where we have to stay in the relationship? The most simple place is to not share them. And that's hard because now you're having to overregulate in a way, which is, this is not the place I can share it. The best example I can give to this, though, is work. Not saying that you work in a narcissistic workplace, but in work, at the workplace, we do learn how to keep it together, right? We do learn how to, like, by and large, we don't burst into tears in a meeting, or we don't start screaming obscenities in a meeting. We don't, right? We keep it together and we stay centered. But we may, at the end of the meeting, go into our car, burst into tears, go into the bathroom and burst into tears. So we have this capacity. And if you can view the not sharing the emotions with a narcissistic person as an act of incredible self-care and self-protection, that can make a difference. So that's one thing, is don't let them see yours. Just kind of keep it in that yellow, rocky, disengaged kind of a space. The other is to be prepared, because one thing narcissistic people do, it's part of the gaslighting complex. Those of you who watch the gaslighting course will know that I talked about this at length. But part of what then happens is that they will project an emotion onto you, or tell you you have an emotion. Like, why are you so angry all the time? And you're like, it's funny, I don't feel angry and I don't think I'm angry, but they're telling you you're angry. Like, oh my gosh, why are you always so sad? And you're thinking, but I'm not sad. So they're telling you you have an emotion. And this is another thing, and I don't know where this person was going with this, but I wanted to bring this up because now not only do you feel a little bit crazy because you're thinking, I don't feel this, you now doubt your emotions, and you may even feel the need to defend, like, I'm not sad. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. So now you're getting into this position of something that's literally yours. No one can tell you what a feeling is. No one. Not Shrink can even listen to you and say, you sound sad. Is that right? Like, am I hearing this right? If you're having trouble finding the words, also, and the patient will say what they feel, right? But they'll literally tell you what your emotions are. When that happens, I'm telling you now here, you're being gaslighted. So there's no more point in further engagement. Somebody's saying, like, why are you so mad all the time? Oh my gosh, I'm so tired of you being sad. Like, oh, you're such a worrier, anxious all the time. And it's not true. They will often do that. You might be, for example, you might be asking them something. You may ask them the question more than one time, right? They might say, oh my gosh, you're a control freak. Why are you so controlling? And you're like, I literally have asked you something that has to get done. Then if that thing didn't get done, they'd also come after you. So again, there's the no winning. The other way to protect emotions when you can't distance is to have places to share them. Again, I'm always going to say therapy is going to be the best place to do that, because it's a safe place not only to express them, but to feel them, own them, not pathologize them, all of that. But whether it's a friend, whatever safe space you can express emotion, and maybe even have other emotional expression outlets. Some folks that's exercise, some folks that's creative, someplace else you feel like you can take this and express it. But that can help you protect it because you have a safe space to take it to. But it is when you stay in a narcissistic relationship, I don't care which one it is, parent, family, partner, friend, workplace, there's a reason you've made that choice. Now, if you've made that choice because you think it's going to change and get better, we're not going to get behind that choice. It's a choice. That's not a great reason, because that's never going to happen and you're going to keep getting hurt. But there's a whole list of acceptable reasons to stay. And when I say that's the only one that feels not acceptable, is because you're going to keep getting hurt, because it's really not going to change. But all the others, including love, being the reason you say, I love this person and I'm staying. However, I'm also aware I am going to get, there's no there. This thing is an empty vessel. And and you stay under those conditions. It's not easy. There's a lot of grief. I get all of that. But when you stay under those conditions, you're also recognizing there is absolutely really not much there. That there is the reason I'm staying is the meaning and purpose around this, whether it's kids, money, finances. You might say that feels awful that it's finances. It does feel awful because some people will say, yeah, I would have left. If I had the money, I would have left. And many people, like I say, I've said this repeatedly, LA is expensive. A lot of people don't leave because they can't pay a second rent. I understand that. So when you're doing that, yes, there can be a lot of grief, anger, frustration, but you're aware too that it may be precarious. You might even have a slow plan that you're building to get yourself out. Think in about 4 or 5 years, I might be able to actually have done this to get out. But to be clear on what that is. So then you say, okay, this is not a place I can bring my emotion. I'm aware of why I keep showing up to this job. And this is definitely not a place I can bring my whole self. I'm going to have to clock in, get my money, get my benefits, and get the hell out of here. And so that's the process. It's the seeing it clearly. The seeing it clearly, though, can really feel kind of gross too. I get that. But those are some of the ways you can think about protecting your emotions when you can't fully disengage. The person's in their comment yesterday said when you can't distancing isn't always physical distancing. Sometimes it's sort of an internal sort of a distancing where we kind of pull back and recognize like, yeah, no, there's just not a lot of here. Someone asked a question about mimicking. Okay, the narcissistic person mimicking, right? And it's really the narcissistic person mimicking us. Now, part of this goes to this place of narcissistic people in a way, because they're chameleons. It's why they're really great salespeople. I say this over and over again. Narcissistic people are good salespeople. There's a lot of reasons for that. But part of it is this capacity because there's a shallowness to narcissism. And the one place that shallowness can serve a person with this personality style well is they can be whatever the situation asks them to be, which is why they can sometimes be really great performers, even actors, because they can really kind of take on another persona and then pop out of that persona and then take on another persona and pop out of that persona. The deeper you're embedded in your sense of self, the harder it is to pop out and be someone else, if that makes sense, right? So there's things we might be asked to do in a job and we may over time realize like, I am never going to be able to do this. This is just not who I am. This is just not. And I like if somebody said to me, be a network greeter at parties every night, I'm like, I don't want that job. So we can the deeper we're embedded in who we are, knowing who we are, again, we can't flip-flop, but they are at the shallowest of levels. So the flip-flopping in and out can mean that there can be some mimicry. And that narcissistic mimicry can create this false sense of attunement that can particularly happen during the love bombing phase, but you don't know it's mimicry. And that can keep happening throughout the relationship. They will literally pick up on pieces of your language and start using your language with you, sometimes even against you. And it can feel very unsettling because it's as though they're there, but they're not really there. And so it has almost like a VR feel to it. That's the best way I could describe it when you're in a relationship with someone's narcissistic. In a way, it's also, I don't know if you've ever read the stuff AI has written. I've read stuff and sometimes people give me stuff. It feels empty. Like it's like food that doesn't have enough flavor. It lacks something. Like it's almost like all the information's here, but it's lacking a zoo. Like, so could somebody like flavor this up somehow? That's what right now, and where we are with AI, where we even VR, that's a little bit of what the sort of the narcissistic mimicry can also feel like. They kind of feel like a person wrote this, but I don't think they did. And so that is a classical part of it. And it's that their capacity to emulate to get supply. And that mimicry ultimately is getting them supply. And it's also giving them sort of a manipulative power dominance place in the relationship. So that's where I think that person was coming from. Now, it can take us to this question that we were sort of circling around, which is, do we ever mimic them? Don't think you mimic them. Mimicry is a little bit intentional, right? And when we think of what it's fascinating because you know what mimicry does in nature? It's actually very there's an interesting history and evolution of it. In fact, I remember in my freshman year of college, I went to a different university in freshman year and I left. And then I ended up completing a UConn I love UConn, but I started at a different university, and we had to read articles on the biology of mimicry, and it was fascinating because they were talking about all these species. The greatest example being viceroy and monarch butterflies, and I think the viceroy copies the monarch. One of them's poisonous and one of them's not. I don't remember that part of it. But the one that you can't tell the two apart. So a bird would avoid eating either of them because they think that pattern means you're going to get sick, but one species of butterfly is not poisonous. So really, what does mimicry do? It allows a species to take on the protective qualities of another species and not be harmed. So the mimicry, in essence, is them also taking on some of your qualities to keep them safe. And so it allows them, if you will, to pass as a socially decent human being or something like that, whatever they're trying to do there. Okay, now you'd think if I could have written my words a little bit better here, I could read my notes. Oh, here's what it was. Can you talk about the high functioning narcissist? Was one of the topics that came up, and I'm happy to. And I'm also that expanded this idea of the self-aware narcissistic person. High functioning narcissism is a lot of narcissistic people. Many, many grandiose narcissistic folks are high functioning. And interestingly, when you go deep into the literature on child abuse, it's the vulnerable narcissistic parents that are more likely to, or some people call them covert, but the vulnerable narcissistic folks, the sullen, passive aggressive ones, that are more likely to abuse their children than the grandiose ones. It's very likely that an element of that is that grandiose narcissists care so much what they look like to other people. So what inhibits their behavior, some of their worst behavior, is not that they care about you, but they know it's a bad look. And the not having a bad look is so, so important to them. So it becomes this odd protective factor for other people. But the problem is when we misinterpret it as being cared for, when in fact it's really, I don't want to look this way to other people, right? The grandiose narcissistic person is much better at keeping their mask on at all times, other than when they're really, really frustrated with you behind closed doors, they'll go off on you. But then they are very careful to make sure that that's done privately. Narcissistic people, like I've said before, make more money. They're more likely to be represented in leadership. Research has shown that images of narcissistic people are they're more successful at dating. So there's lots of folks who are high functioning narcissistic folks because of how our economy and our world and jobs and careers and all of it are organized. Narcissistic people are willing to do what it takes to get ahead. And so because of all those reasons, many are quite high functioning. Now, part of their struggle becomes what qualifies as high functioning. I don't think somebody who's killing it at work and making lots of money, but is terrible to other people is high functioning. Other people might take umbrage. They'll say, well, they're good at their job. And many of them are very, quote unquote, good at their jobs, but narcissistic people are often good at an outcome. The outcome might be making the most money, closing the most sales, writing the most papers for publication, getting the most patients through, attracting the best clients to a firm, whatever it may be, they're good at one thing. They're not good at all the things. It's very likely that their direct reports hate them. It's likely that they've done some shady things, that they're not ethical. All of those things are quite likely and possible. So so what that all means, though, is that we make the mistake of thinking the very successful narcissistic person is high functioning. No, they're able to do one thing, right? It's like teaching like a dog to play the piano. It's not like they're a maestro. They can hit some keys. I still don't know if it's a nice dog, probably because they're really well trained. But you know what I'm saying? Anyone can learn one trick. The rest doesn't mean the rest of them is nice. And the odds are, the more successful the person, they're not always very nice in relationships because they have so much power, so much entitlement. Those things are going to get worse. But that punts us to this area of the self-aware narcissist. And I remember many years ago, a client saying to me, you know why I kind of hate you, Dr. DeVosla? I said, why? I mean, I'm sure there had been a lot of reasons why he hated me. And he's like, you took me, and now I'm aware I'm an asshole. And thanks so much. And now I'm a dick. And he was actually kind of angry at me. But he said, so sorry. He said, I'm kind of a self-aware narcissist now because I'm kind of knowing when I'm doing it, but I still don't care. And I still don't want to be bothered, but I don't want everyone to think I'm a bad guy. So this concept of the self-aware narcissist is a person who kind of gets it. They're smart enough to know, like, yeah, I see why people don't like this, but it's still who they are. And so now they're having to put all this work into not who they are, and they don't want to do that. So I'm so sorry when the thing catches the wrong way in this throat of mine. So some of you, and it's rare, might be in relationships with people. It's not that rare. I might be in relationships with people who are like, I know, that was such an ass thing to say. I know. We got to get this done. I'm sorry. I know. I'm not supposed to say that. So it doesn't feel sincere. It's as though, like, okay, I get it. You all have all these empathy rules and gotta be respectful stuff. And I guess that wasn't that. So the self-aware narcissistic person might start seeing how some of their behavior doesn't track as what other people would like, but they're literally endorsing this is not what comes naturally to me. And so and some people said I was actually kind of nicer to be a jerk and go through life without always sort of saying, like, oh, I was jerky. I said, well, welcome to how you make everyone else feel. So yeah, high functioning narcissistic folks are tricky though too, because in the love bombing phase, they really can be attractive. You're meeting someone at the top of their game. They've got it together, doing well in their jobs. They're great. And all the ways we think someone's supposed to look great when we meet them. And so the high functioning narcissistic person is absolutely well positioned for love bombing. If you had a parent who was a high functioning narcissist, it is confusing as hell, because you may very well have a parent who was well regarded and highly valued and people liked them. You might have even had a comfortable life. You might have even respected and admired some of the things they did, which really messed you up trauma bond wise. So I think many people feel confused by the high functioning narcissist. The way I want to unconfuse you is they seem high functioning because they were good at a few things. They had things they were good at. That doesn't make them a good person. Someone being smart doesn't mean they're a good person. Just because somebody's a great, I don't know, chef doesn't make them a good person. Just because somebody can throw a ball better than anyone in the world, it doesn't make them a good person. Or run a company. Hell, there's even people out there who are amazing, amazing doctors. They are like the best surgeons, or they're doing the best medical research. They may not be a good person. Just because someone's good at something or successful, it doesn't mean they have all that other stuff, the empathy, the attunement, the kindness, the warmth, the self-awareness. Don't assume that, okay? But it's a lot harder if this is a parent you grew up with. And it's also harder because the enablers will all say, oh my gosh, they're so successful. This is so amazing. And you're like, yeah, so amazing. What about the calling you crazy part? I'm always going to tell you that back to gaslighting. So when the narcissistic person calls you crazy, it's just, that's it. Yeah, that should immediately be you sitting up and thinking gaslighting, which the next thing that should be going through your mind is disengage, distance, and don't get into the mud with them. Like, these should start becoming sequences for you. You're not crazy. Having a different feeling from someone is not crazy. Having a different belief from someone is not crazy. Having a feeling itself is not crazy. Feeling that a relationship is a place where somebody should take accountability, be responsible, apologize when they do something wrong is not crazy. Sharing a vulnerability when you feel like something is happening that's, I don't know, made you feel a little suspicious is not crazy. So it's and again, I like I told you, therapists are not supposed to use the word crazy. It's a bad word, but it's a very unique word, because I actually don't think it belongs in the world of mental health. It's something very specific. To me, crazy doesn't mean that you're hearing voices or you're psychotic or you have a mental illness. Crazy is that you are somehow broken off from reality. You are you're almost delusional. I guess that would be the one psychological psychiatric term I'd use there. But it's really someone kind of getting in there and doing a number on you and feeling like, I don't know what's right anymore. That's crazy. And when they say that to you, it almost should be like, I wish I could create some sort of stop sign for everyone that just, I'm being gaslighted. I got to get the hell out of this conversation. That's that. What about sex addiction? I told you I'm going to be jumping around a little bit today. What about sex addiction? Not all narcissistic people are sex addicts, and not all sex addicted people are narcissistic. Okay. Is there a high overlap? Yep. Is it all of them? No. There is a subset of people who would meet whatever benchmarks we have for what we call compulsive sexual behavior, which is sort of conversationally called sex addiction, who often have some histories of sexual trauma, sexual abuse, particularly problematic parental enmeshment, that kind of thing. And they themselves will say there's tremendous amounts of shame for these folks, tremendous amounts of shame. And they will attempt to make amends. They will take responsibility. They will not blame their partners, and will often be good candidates for treatment. And then there's the narcissistic people who are sex addicts, and heaven help you if you're in a relationship with someone like this. It is horrifying because they will blame you. They will keep doing it. They will then keep saying, you can't be mad at me because I have an addiction. That's where you're going to get with that. And there'll often be no accountability. When they go into treatment for it, there's still a lot of blame shifting. Does pornography addiction fall under the umbrella of sex addiction? Yes. So it's like sex addiction could be anything from porn addiction to paying people to have sex with you on a regular basis. And again, there's partly this assumption that it feels dysregulated to the person who's doing it. They can't stop themselves, like any addiction. They can't stop themselves. They're thinking about it when they can't do it. It's causing problems in their lives. It's preoccupying them. It's taking a lot of their time. They do it despite it causing danger to them. Those are the things that make something an addiction. And you keep doing it, even though you know all these things, even though it's blowing up your relationship, even though it's destroying your family. So pornography use, paid sex, consistently having relationships out of the primary relationships that are not, this is not part of an open relationship, that kind of thing. So yes, highly, highly correlated, not absolute overlap, but the two are associated. And if you're dealing with someone who has a sex addiction and who is not if you're dealing with someone who has a sex addiction and who's narcissistic, heaven help you, it's just going to keep happening. And they will not register that it's harming you. But I have talked with and worked with folks who have partners who have sex addiction, porn, compulsive sexual behavior, call it what you will, but are not narcissistic. It's a very different conversation. I'm going to get into one last question, and I'm going to jump into your questions, or not one last question, one last theme. Are narcissistic people capable of love? And this is a philosophical question as much as it's what I'm going to bring here is a personality question, and what you're going through in your relationships. It's a tricky question because love means such different things to all of us. And so I don't get to be the empress of love here and decide what love is, right? I think we have some pretty good sense, though. I think what we call love, probably if we jump the rails over to what is a healthy relationship, reciprocity, mutuality, respect, compassion, kindness, attunement, safety, all those things are love. Narcissistic people really aren't capable of those. But do narcissistic people, so narcissistic people are capable of being present with someone when their needs are aligned, of enjoying someone who's doing something that they enjoy too, of a very superficial kind of a love, like a showing up kind of a love. They might always remember birthday cards. They might always remember to call you on certain times, and that will feel like love to you, because we often associate consistency and love, like, oh, they must love me, they always remember my birthday. And then you might have some friend who never remembers a birthday, but my God, they love you so much and they've come through for you in big ways. I think we've got to get away from just like checking the boxes as being love. I would say that their capability of love is probably not at a level of depth that most of us would consider love. But if you ask them if they love you and they tell you that they love you, they're not lying to you. It's just that you might have two very, very different conceptions or definitions of what constitutes love. So let's go to the questions, because that's about as deep as the topic gets. So let's see. I'm sure you're going to go deeper. So when you're supporting a friend enduring narcissistic abuse, how do I protect myself from the narcissistic person's rage and revenge? That's a great question, because remember, narcissistic abuse is on a continuum. And this is a very personal question to me, because this happened when I supported someone once and the narcissistic person came after me with threats of violence and all kinds of other harm. It was a really awful, awful period of my life. I will never, ever forgive this person for what they did to me. It was awful. I'm still terrified of running into this person. So I feel so much. I really feel this question in my body. It was and I had young children at the time. This person threatened my kids. It was awful. Nobody would help me. Law enforcement wouldn't help me. Other people called me crazy. Like, it was a disaster. So I absolutely feel this question. I think that here's the rub. I don't know how bad this person's rage and revenge is and if it's harmful, but if that's the case to the person asking this question, as you guide this friend, I have to say, your friend's going to have to take you seriously, because you cannot act as your friend's shrink and then remaining in this seat of harm while your friend is sort of like, well, I think I'm going to go back, or whatever it may be. It gets confusing, right? So you need to understand what your limits are, what your friend's choices are going to be. And here's the other thing: you cannot be your friend's therapist. You cannot be. A lot of us, I am a therapist and I can't be my friend's therapist. There's a point at which I'm like, dude, I got to feed the cat. Like, I got to go. I would never say that to a client, but there's a point when a friend's telling me something like, there are cats and hummingbirds and a whole civilization in my house that needs to be dealt with, and I got to go. So there's different rules and sort of boundaries around how we do therapy, right? So if you have a friend who's going through this, you can't be the only game in town for this friend. Your friend has a responsibility to get other forms of help for this too, number one, okay? You also have to ask your friend really what is happening, because I may have to safeguard myself, number two. Number three, you may need to have to safeguard yourself, and that might mean all the things we do to safeguard ourselves: alarms and blocking numbers and getting whatever protections we need, and saving documentation and saving messages and all the things we might need to do to stay safe in a given situation. You're going to block the narcissistic person's messages, their phone number, their emails. People say, but what if I need them for evidence? You don't have to respond to them. You can tag them in a way that they can go. They will still be gotten, but you don't have to see them. And then you're also seeing what your friend is going through. So you also have a sense of the horror that they're enduring, and you can obviously, that could be part of the support you offer them. But you've got to take care of yourself. You really do, and you do have to help that friend take some responsibility for stepping up and getting the help they need. It might mean connecting them to domestic violence, and you yourself are going to need your own support through therapy. Again, I went to this exact situation, and I just think I'm going back to that time, and it was so awful. It was so awful. And this person who did this was so evil. And the sick part of it was, that person, that friend that came to me and I tried to help, ended up becoming sort of buddies with that harmful ex and didn't apologize. That's a story for a different day. But I think you do need to make sure that you're protecting yourself. You can be present with your friend, but you also ensure that your friend has the supports they need that might be more than what you can offer in conversations. And obviously also say, I get it. Don't ever invalidate the friend and be there, but you've got to make sure you have your protections in place, and don't ever underestimate the vindictiveness. Like, it's not beyond a narcissistic person to call your employer, call other family members, do all kinds of awful things. Be on the ready. Be the best offense and defense. I literally had this person was sending process servers to where my employer was. Like, it was bad. It harmed me tremendously in my career. So I fully get this. And so you've got to also understand your limits in this situation. So I hope that's helpful. Good luck. And definitely, you've got to keep yourself safe. Other questions? This is my question. When do you think is a good time to start dating others after an 8-month no contact? Honey, wait another 4 months. I'm a big fan of a year. Why a year? Does that feel arbitrary? The only reason I'd let you go at 8 months is if the relationship only lasted 8 months. So if you were in that relationship, how long you were, you guys broke up, now you've been 8 months, no contact, right? I want, if, and assuming your relationship that you want no contact from lasts more than a year, I'd love to see you go a year. Pay attention to how you're feeling. Are you, you should be on a path of knowing yourself more, feeling more autonomous, being more connected with your authentic self, feeling. One thing I would love to hear is that you're no longer doing things like, I wish they could see me now, like I'll show them. The less we have an I'll show them, I wish they could see me now, it's bad because we're still connecting ourselves to them. But the more you're feeling like, I think I'm ready, and I'm open to it, and you're willing to be discerning, then you're getting there. But another 4 months. Why is a year so magical to me? Because in a year, we go through every anniversary date once, whatever the anniversary dates, first date, actual anniversary, birthdays, holidays. You go through summer, you go through all of that one time, and you find your own rhythm in each of those seasons, as it were, each of those events. There's something about a year. Listen, it's how long it takes, it takes us, the earth, to spin around the sun. There's something there for us. So give yourself a year. And then sort of check in with yourself. And some people say it takes more than a year, but enjoy these next 4 months. It's almost summer. Go out there, have the summer of your life on your own. Do the things you want, have the fun you want, laugh out loud, and and don't feel like you have to censor that for someone else. And as you come out of that and feel more in you, in your body, in yourself, then it's time to start. Next question. Is it common for a child who has had 1 or 2 narcissistic parents end up becoming more vulnerable to narcissistic relationships as an adult? It is. It is. Is it a guarantee? No. And if I had one wish for the world, it would be that everyone in their 20s who had a narcissistic parent got like a free year of therapy, because I think that's an age at which young people from 20 to 30 still have trouble calling this out for what it is, or even knowing what it is. Because the more one can say like, hey, whoa, what my parents did was unacceptable, or this is understanding where those patterns of self-doubt, having a more coherent narrative, as we say, that all of that can be protective. Part of the reason we become more vulnerable, I think, as I've said over and over again, all of us are vulnerable to getting into these relationships, but getting into these relationships isn't the problem. It's getting stuck in these relationships. That's the problem. Okay. It's not the getting in, it's the getting stuck. All of us get in because everyone's attracted to successful, charismatic people. We're not going to ever change that. But it's the getting stuck. Why? Because even as the love bombing fades and the math goes down to like 40% good and 60% bad, now we're coming into a system that's almost like old school familiar to us, right? It's, oh yeah, I have to justify myself. Oh yeah, like it's all the things we're used to doing. It's the self-doubt and the self-blame, which almost felt familiar to going back into, and we don't question ourselves. And we often, again, if we had narcissistic parents, we very much had to develop our identity in service to another person, our parents, instead of being allowed to form an identity that was all our own and be able to say like, oh, if somebody's not treating me well, I have the right to step away. And this is actually what mistreatment is. The way this person's treating you is something that's familiar and old. We don't question it. In fact, one of the great pains of people who've had narcissistic parents is when they get into adulthood and they start getting into relationships, there is this schema of, oh, I'm lucky this person wants to be with me. I'm lucky I'm in a relationship. I'm lucky that they're showing up, because that was a little of what the narrative was when we were a kid. Well, I'm lucky they want to spend time with me, right? So absolutely, I would say the way I would answer your question is, your question is almost stating the right answer, but it's common for a child who's had 1 or both narcissistic parents to end up being more vulnerable to getting stuck in narcissistic relationships as an adult. The more you can identify it and do some of the work of, again, that individuation of what's not okay, you'll have built up that muscle more. But it's never going to be easy. There's always going to be this sort of, again, this quiet trauma bonded part of ourselves that wants to make the excuses. And in a way, we have to quietly guide that part back and say, this is not okay. Next question. How do I spot if a partner is narcissistic, or whether it's me feeling vulnerable to his actions since I was brought up with a narcissistic mother? Okay, so this is a great question, because we sometimes get so caught up. So many people get so caught up in, is this person narcissistic? Do I work with someone narcissistic? Do I have a narcissistic colleague? We get so caught up in the what is this of it all that we don't just let ourselves identify patterns that are problematic. So here's somebody saying, I had a narcissistic mom, and some of the actions this person is engaging in, I don't exactly know what this person means when I say feel vulnerable to them, but it may be that by vulnerable, it could mean that this person is like, these actions are hurting me or leaving me uncomfortable. To keep it simpler, if somebody's doing something in a relationship that feels uncomfortable, pay attention to that part of it. Because what I'm concerned is that person will say, this doesn't feel good, but maybe I'm calling this out because I had a narcissistic parent. Actually, maybe you're in an amazing position to know that this is, again, part 2 of not okay. It was not okay then, it's not okay now what this new person's doing. And then not fall into the pattern of, well, maybe I'm sensitive. That's you gaslighting you. It's us being able to say, what just happened didn't feel okay. And we may or may not be able to change it in that person. We may or may not be able to address it. None of those things may be possible. But we can say, whatever this was, I didn't like it. And let me take a step back, and not like, oh, because I have a narcissistic mom, maybe it's not all that. It doesn't feel okay. And are the things that don't feel okay to us shaped by other things that have happened in our life? Yes. 1000% yes. So I'm going to give you an example because it came up in a meeting I had this morning. And one thing I say, because I'm very aware of this, warmth, enthusiasm, and encouragement. If I get those things, I could find a way to make the earth spin in a different direction. Like when people do that, I'm going to figure it out. I'll write another book this afternoon. I'll do it. I'll paint your house. I can do anything. But when I don't get that, when I'm with people who are a little bit more negativistic or down, I get this I get a little almost jittery is the only word I could use, right? That's a product of my history. That's why I am the way I am. And for the longest time, I thought, oh, Ramani, you're the problem because you can't work with a wide range of people. I can work with a wide range of people. I happen to like people who are agreeable, warm, encouraging, and are solution-oriented. That's what I know about myself because of where I came from. Talked with somebody who came from kind of a sunshiny, everything's great family, and they had a remarkable capacity to not be bothered by negativistic people. They're like, oh, okay, well, that's how they do it, but they've got their strengths, and we can do it that way. Our histories shape how we uptake people, and we can't go back and give ourselves a different history. You who asked this question, you had a narcissistic mother, and what that's going to mean is that when patterns that resemble that show up in adulthood may not be comfortable, they're not comfortable. And you have the right to say, I don't like how this feels. And this may not be the right thing for me. And so I think that that's where we have to recognize that these histories shape us. I get a little leery of people out there like, you can just be different. Throw it all aside. You're not your history. Yeah, you kind of are. Unless you intend to like find some way to power wash your hippocampus. Yeah, you are. And what we can do is recognize that like, I don't like this, but I can work with this. But I recognize that if there's an opportunity that had that different way of being, well, that might be a little bit better for me. And in this case, you are actually in almost an expert seat because you know what these patterns look like. And if they're coming up again, pay attention to them. I have worked with so many folks who've been in this situation. They had a vulnerable or some other narcissistic parent. The stuff is showing up in their relationship as adults, and they're saying, is this just me picking that out? Your partner being narcissistic, not narcissistic, it doesn't matter. Us getting caught up in that conversation takes our eye off the prize, which is there's something happening in this relationship I don't like. Stay on that. And if it's consistently happening, then that's even a bigger problem, right? Narcissism is about consistency, but don't get so caught up in, is he not? Is it entitlement? Is it this? Are they this? Are they that? This is a pattern that keeps coming up over and over and over and over again, and it's not going anywhere. And I've tried to communicate about it, and it's not going anywhere. I've got a problem. That's probably a cleaner way to formulate it rather than getting caught in the narcissistic piece. And the fact is, if you keep communicating about something with someone and they're not changing it, I don't know if they're narcissistic, but they definitely have a rigidity, that personality that may not be good for you in the long term. So take your time with this, but don't pathologize and doubt yourself because you think like, oh, this is just me. I had a narcissistic mom. I don't know what I'm looking at. I think you actually know what you're looking at better than the average person. Let's take out a couple more. Is narcissism genetic in any way? I know it's a personality disorder. It's not, and I'm going to take that on in a minute, but my family has 3 generations of narcissists. Narcissism is not a personality disorder. It's not a personality disorder. It is a personality style, okay? Now, any personality style, agreeableness, openness, introversion, narcissism, taken to an extreme is going to be a problem. If a person is overly agreeable, overly amenable, overly modest, overly willing to make accommodations, that's a problem, folks, because that person's going to be taken advantage of. They're never going to advocate for themselves. They are going to they're never going to, they're just, it's almost like their humility is going to do them in. They're never going to even be able to get the things that they might even need. And they might just do too much for other people and do nothing for themselves. So even what we consider a healthy style, personality style, taken to its extreme is a problem. Narcissism at its mildest levels, it's a headache, it's a nuisance, it's an annoyance. It's certainly not diagnosed. It's certainly not a disorder. I've got some mild narcissistic friends. They make me chuckle, but I'm not going to call them on a bad day. So that to me is, there's something workable there. Narcissism's a personality style. Now, by definition, it's maladaptive and it's rigid. It doesn't change because antagonistic styles don't. It puts folks at odds with other people. But as we said today in the live, it also helps people get successful the way the world's set up. So it's complicated. It's not a personality disorder. Is there a thing called narcissistic personality disorder? There is in the DSM. And and the only way you can get it is if you show up to a therapist's office and they meet with you for long enough to get it. You have to remember this really crucial point. There are people out there with narcissistic personality disorder. They have the diagnosis. Someone wrote it on a piece of paper, right? They have it. And yet their narcissism is not as severe as people who are walking out in the world and never saw a therapist, so they don't have this diagnosis. And so it's a technicality. And in fact, the International Classification of Diseases, the World Health Organization's manual, they've gotten rid of narcissistic personality disorder. They just talk about personality disorder in general. So let's forget the term. It's a personality style and it is not genetic. In fact, there are other personality styles like antisocial personality disorder, which is called psychopathy, in other literature and other frameworks. That has a little bit more of a genetic component to it. Even borderline personality has been argued to potentially have some form of genetic component to it. Schizotypal personality disorder, which is it's a near cousin to schizophrenia, and that also has a genetic component. Those would be the 3 personality disorders that have some genetic component. There's not an evidence base for the genetics of narcissism. It's a social developmental phenomenon. Temperament is genetic, but temperament is shaped by the environment. So temperament's like a sourdough starter that ends up getting shaped by everything that's happening around the person. So all of that said, no, there's no evidence that it's genetic, but it is intergenerational. Why? Because generation after generation of narcissistic parents, the invalidation and all the other stuff that goes through it, is going to take some members of that family and a new generation and a new generation. And when it becomes commonplace in a family, it's more likely to be enabled and emboldened and supported and allowed to fester. And if people question it, they're told there's something wrong with it. And the family coalesces around maintaining that status quo. But it's not genetic. And some people worry like, oh my gosh, I have a narcissistic father and a narcissistic grandmother, am I going to have a narcissistic child? No. As long as you parent them with presence and consistency, and hopefully two not narcissistic parents, and there's psychological safety and secure attachments, the answer is no. And look at how many of us have been raised by narcissistic parents and we're not narcissistic. So it's not the odds-on favorite of what's going to happen. There's still far, far fewer narcissistic people in the population than there are healthy people. I mean, I know this whole channel and program, what I talk about is about this because of the harms of this, but it's still not the majority of people you're going to encounter. So I understand the fears, but despite that, 3 generations, and I don't think you're alone in having multiple generations of this, the generation where you hold on again to those coherent narratives, you have a healthier sense of you, raise children in a way full of empathy and not conditional love, and not making them jump through hoops, but just see them for who they are and attune to them, the cycle does get broken. It really does. So I've gone over an hour, so I've kept you for long enough. We're going to have another one tomorrow. It'll be in the morning. I can tell you that now because I have a bit of a day tomorrow. But these lives are just a reminder of how much is lurking in this book that explains this and so much more. I know some people are finding some utility in it. There's book clubs popping up everywhere, all kinds of stuff. Order a hard copy of this pup, either hard copy or ebook, and verify the purchase. Easy to do, either in our either use the link in Instagram in the bio, or on or you can use the in the link in the video, the show notes, and verify it. Just provide the tiny bit of information we need from you. Not only will you get for free the 6-hour live virtual retreat in May, you'll also be entered into our ongoing raffle as long as this book is sitting, strangely at this point, on that bestseller list. You're going to be entered. Every week we draw 5 more teas with Dr. Ramani, and then as well as, which is a 30-minute conversation with me by Zoom, just you and I just chatting away, and me answering some questions, as well as all kinds of other raffle prizes. That's going to keep going. So if you want to you're like, oh, I'm going to order this for a friend, great. Get yourself another raffle entry. And again, the book's on sale on Amazon. And so thank you again for your amazing questions. Before we go, if you have any ideas for what you want to be in a live tomorrow, a topic, toss it in here now. Otherwise, I still have plenty to work with. But if you have any, we're going to keep it going for about another few minutes so I can see your ideas. And then I'll see you tomorrow. Any ideas for what you'd like to see covered in a live tomorrow? Super empaths, you got it. I'm going to write in a way I can actually read. Great one. Post-traumatic growth. And I've seen your name in some of our other lives, so welcome back. Thank you. Okay, post-traumatic growth. Brainwashed adult children. I'm so glad you actually brought that up, because I love it. The impact on society. You got it. That's a big one. Amazing. Aging narcissists. Very good. Any other topics you want to see tomorrow? We got these super empaths. Oh, you're so kind. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, such a good one. Thank you. Thank you. Brilliant with the enablers. Yes. More on the empaths. I'm going to double star that. Are they intentional or unconscious? Great. Gosh, religious. Thank you. And someone else asked for that spiritual. I've got an email about that. Absolutely. Yep. Physical health. You got that. Huge topic, by the way. Health issues from NA, and many people, autoimmune, all kinds of issues have come up. All the context, Gray Rock and on. You got it. Any others? Pull another one. This is already going to be like a long live. All right, let's leave it at that, because that's enough. All right, so I'll see everyone. Go ahead. Remember, midnight tomorrow, whatever your time zone is, get that book by then. Keep getting those raffle entries in. But whatever you do, whether you get it or not, it is my pleasure to talk to you about this and answer your amazing questions. Thank you so much for the honesty, vulnerability, and the thoughtfulness you bring to these questions. It's its own masterclass for me as I look at how thoughtful and how much you're making me to think about these, how thoughtful you are, how wise you are, and how much you're forcing me to do deeper dives into the research every day. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful Friday, and it's the Ides of March. Just be careful, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.